Well, we are in chapter 9, part 3. And there's a little bit of a contrast here. In the last chapter that we talked about last week, we talked about the centurion who had great faith. He was a Gentile, and he still came to Jesus and said, you just say the word, it'll be done. And now we come to this story of Jesus, and while he is with some people, a ruler comes and kneels before him. Now in the other gospels, we know that his name is Jairus, and that he is the ruler of the synagogue. So he comes and says, my daughter has just died, but come and put your hand on her. So he is saying, I need you to come physically to her and put your hand on her. So he has faith that he can heal him, but he needs more action behind it. Whereas, again, the contrast to the centurion is, you just say the word, it's going to be done. I have that much faith. Now, of course, Jairus does say, she will live if you come and put your hand on her. Jesus gets up and went with him, and so did his disciples. Now, there is a woman that's there. She has been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She comes up behind him and touches the edge of his cloak. She said to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. Okay, so now let's go back to what we just talked about yesterday with the marrying of the Judaism, the Jewish culture, and Messianic faith. Here's where it gets pretty good. Now, when you look at the word touch the edge of his cloak, that word there is in reference to a fringe. Now, that fringe was specific because it was on a tallit. Now, tallit is like a prayer shawl that they would wear over their heads. They still use them now, but on the end are corners, and there's tassels on there. Is the fringe of the cloak. Now, this is referenced several times in Scripture, but it is called the tzitzit, if I pronounce that right. And it is also known as the wings of the tallit. So there's a scripture that said there is healing, I think it's Malachi 4:2, that there is healing in his wings. He rises with healing in his wings, and is referencing this right here, the tzitzit, that there's healing in his fringe, in his tassels. And so this woman knows that this is the holiest part of this garment. The tzitzit was known to be a reminder of God's commands and to remind them to be holy before God. It was the holiest part of the garment. So she goes, and she doesn't just grab a hold of any part of the garment. She goes and touches the fringe, the wings of his tallit, the tzitzit. Now, she is unclean, and because of her bleeding condition, according to the Old Testament laws, by her touching somebody else, they would also become unclean. But what happens is that Jesus cleans her instead. It turns it around. So instead of her making Jesus unclean, he cleans her. So let's see. Also in Leviticus 6:27, Jesus, let's see. Let's just turn there because it's actually quite a fascinating passage. Leviticus. And I'm sorry if you hear my children in the background. They're having a ton of fun right now. 6:27. Whatever touches any of the flesh will become holy, and if any of the blood is spattered on a garment, you must wash it in a holy place. So whatever touches any of the flesh will become holy. So this woman goes and touches this part, the holiest part of Jesus's garments, this part of who he is, and she becomes clean. So Jesus is the sin offering. When you read in Leviticus 6:24 and all, you're reading that there's a sin offering that's been given. Well, Jesus is that sin offering. So whatever touches him becomes clean. Now, I find it interesting. This is kind of just a sidebar. But when we take communion, what are we doing? It says to participate by taking of the bread that is representation of his flesh. Well, when we partake of that, it is a symbol of his flesh, which what we just read, he is the sin offering. So whatever touches any of the flesh will become holy. So when we have communion with Jesus, it is a time of him making us purified and holy as we spend that time. So it's just a sidebar because it was kind of a fascinating thing when I was reading that this week. But this woman, she says to herself, if I only touch his cloak, I will be healed. She knows that if she touches him, she will be healed. And Jesus turns and sees her. It says, take heart, daughter. Your faith has healed you. So again, we see an act of faith where we had the centurion who said, just say the word, I will be healed. Well, now this woman doesn't even come to him to talk to him. She has that much faith to believe that all she has to touch is the fringe of his garment, and she will be healed. Now that's also juxtaposed to this man, the ruler, who is struggling a little bit in that kind of faith, and he is needing Jesus to physically come and touch his daughter. So Jesus turns to her and says, your faith has healed you. Is then that she's healed. When Jesus speaks to her and says, it's your faith that has healed you. When this woman walks out her faith. So when Jesus entered the ruler's house and saw the flute players and the noisy crowd, he said, go away. The girl is not dead, but asleep. But they laughed at him. After the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took the girl by the hand, and she got up. News of this spread throughout all the region. Now note here, Jesus didn't actually say anything to her. He just takes her by the hand and she wakes up. That authority there is just taking up and pulling up, and you're awake, you're alive. Now the culture at this time was that they would hire actors, mourners, to come in and weep over those that were dead. But Jesus is getting rid of any of those. Anybody who's acting and they're not true, there's no truth there. There's doubt. They have no faith. He sends those out of the room so that way the healing could flow. And let's see. Okay. This was another note. Sorry. My notes are not quite the same, so I'm kind of more off the cuff now. I'm trying. But when Jesus touches the little girl, of course, this is another example of someone who is unclean. They were not supposed to, Jewish cultures, they're not supposed to touch anything that is dead. Especially a person, unless they also become unclean, and they would have that time of having to be purified after touching a dead body. So that would make Jesus unclean, except that Jesus touches her. The moment he touches her, she's alive. She's not dead. So therefore he is not unclean, but he makes her clean. So news of this spreads throughout all the region, and we go into the next miracle that takes place, and we will read about that tomorrow.